Hi everybody, it's Mr. Han, and we're in our final week of biology. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to sum up everything that we've talked about in the last number of weeks, particularly with organ systems. We're going to talk about how they interact with each other to sustain life. So by the end, I want you to be able to explain how all the organ systems are constantly working together to accomplish the tasks that we need to do to keep our bodies alive. Now I start with this diagram, so I want you to go back and think about sort of the organization of life and this idea that we start out as cells and that those cells over time multiply through mitosis over and over and over again. They become a pile of cells, and then through cell specialization they start to become tissues. Okay, and then those tissues over time start to form and shape and take on roles as organs. And then finally, those organs join together to form organ systems. So everything we've covered in the last 4 or 5 weeks has gone into understanding this hierarchy, and then specifically how these organ systems all work together to accomplish all our tasks. So far we've been looking really specifically at the digestive system, respiratory system, and circulatory system, but there are many more. We've seen there's 11 systems in our body, okay? And these systems have to be constantly interacting in order for us to survive. So specifically I want to go back to looking at like the digestive system and the circulatory system and how they work together. Okay, so recall that the circulatory system swings by the digestive system and picks up nutrients while it's there, okay, and is also bringing nutrients and bringing oxygen to those tissues around the digestive system. Okay, and all this is being accomplished through a series of capillaries. Okay, the absorption from the intestines happens through the villi. Okay, and to kind of zoom in on it, this is what it looks like. This is what a villi would look like. You got this layer of epithelial cells all around the outside. Okay, it's one layer thick, and so as food moves through, okay, these blood capillaries are picking up glucose, okay, sugars and amino acids, those building blocks for proteins, and putting them into the circulatory system where it's going to be pumped around the body and hopefully make it to all those tissues that need that glucose for energy or need those amino acids for building. The respiratory system and circulatory system kind of interact in a similar way in that the circulatory system very specifically swings by the respiratory system in order to pick up oxygen. Okay, so it's going there to pick up oxygen, and also while it's there, it's dropping off carbon dioxide, and all of that is happening in the lungs. So capillaries run through the lungs in the alveoli. What that does is it allows for this exchange of material there as well. So inside those alveoli, okay, oxygen from the air is getting into our bloodstream. Okay, carbon dioxide is being dropped off. That air is then being pushed back up out of our lungs, and we breathe it out. And this oxygen then travels on back to the heart and then out to the rest of the body. Now, there are some other systems that we haven't talked about. For instance, the excretory system. Okay, this may have come up in the lab that we did for the circulatory system, but we haven't talked about it much yet. So the main job of the excretory system is to get the other wastes out of our body, so the things that aren't carbon dioxide, the things that aren't food waste, the other things that come out of our cells that are dangerous. Our body needs to get them out. So in particular, nitrogen compounds go into making urea, which goes into making urine. Okay, we need to remove that from our cells. We need to remove it from our tissues. So what happens is it diffuses into the blood. The blood is going to then swing by the kidneys. The kidneys act to kind of scrub out those harmful compounds, okay, and then they get released as urine or as waste. The same thing happens with sweat. You might have noticed this before. For instance, if you've ever eaten a lot of meat in a short period of time, sometimes that will actually induce sweating because there are toxins in the meat that normally if you eat just a small amount of meat, it's not problematic, but if you eat a large amount of meat in a very short amount of time, your body can have a hard time dealing with those toxins, and it will start to induce sweating in order to get them out. Okay. So the circulatory system makes a swing by, like I said, the kidneys. Okay, and that's where your blood is going to be scrubbed or filtered. Okay, the wastes are going to be removed. Okay, and they're going to then fill up your bladder. And once your bladder is filled, then you will have to go to the washroom, and that's where you will excrete that waste. Now, the nervous system and everything else. We talked a little bit about the nervous system early on when we were talking about nerve cells and how nerve cells are specialized for sending signals. So that one right here, okay, and basically the whole nervous system is a series of interconnected nervous cells and tissues that ultimately connect to our brain, and their job is to send and receive information. So sometimes your brain might want to move a part of your body. So you get a signal coming into the cell, and then that cell is going to pass on the signal to the muscle tissue, and that is going to cause it to contract, and that is going to cause motion. Okay. Similarly, this happens in other places in the body, not just the skeletal muscles, but all around our digestive system, our diaphragm for breathing. So you can see where the connections are to respiration and the circulatory system. Okay, all of those things that need motion are being controlled by nervous tissue. Okay, and ultimately being controlled by the brain. There are ways in which, without even conscious thought, our bodies are moving all the time, and we don't have to think about how to move them. Okay, you don't have to think about pumping your heart. You don't have to think about moving your diaphragm in and out to breathe. That all just happens naturally. Okay. Other times where you might see this happen is if you were to touch something hot, for instance. So if you were to put your hand on like a stove and it was extremely hot, you don't have to consciously think about moving your hand. Your nervous system will actually take care of that for you. The last one that we haven't talked a lot about, but there's a few videos in this week's lesson on this is the immune system. Okay, it's the body's defense system. Okay, it's defending against infectious organisms and other invaders like viruses. Okay, or toxins that might be getting in the body. So its job is to create an immune response. And this immune response, as you'll see in the videos this week, is sort of varied, and there's quite a few cells involved in that. Basically, what those cells are going to do is they are going to attack the organism, attack the substance that's invading the body, try to break it down, try to capture it, and remove it as soon as possible. Okay? And basically, at the end of the day, what it's trying to do is seek out and destroy things that are not supposed to be in our bodies. And the immune system has this sort of neat connection to the circulatory system, as well as the lymphatic system, and also to our bones, where bone marrow is produced. That's where you get your white blood cells. Okay, and this is one of the important parts about like bone marrow transplants, for instance. When people have something wrong with their circulatory system, or sorry, with their immune system or their circulatory system, with the red blood cells or the white blood cells, one of the things that might be necessary is a bone marrow transplant in order to help them produce the cells that are necessary to protect their body. So that's how all the systems interact in a nutshell. This kind of brings us to the end of this biology unit. What we're going to do is we're going to now take a couple of systems. I want you, for the assignment this week, I want you to figure out a couple of systems you'd like to explore. Okay, and I've given some scenarios in the slide deck. Look at those scenarios, figure out one that works for you. You might want to go back to like the organ that you'd done some research on a couple weeks ago. You're going to explore that interconnection of those two systems, and then what you're going to do is you're going to create an infographic, which is just like a visual poster that explains how those two systems interact. And you're welcome to add 3 systems in or 4 systems in, whatever makes sense for your scenario, whatever makes sense for your understanding. But 2 systems minimum, explain how they interact in order to accomplish that certain life task. And then what I want you to do to take your research one step further is in part 3 of the assignment, I want you to figure out a disease that affects one of those organ systems that you discussed. Okay, so what I've done is I've provided a list of diseases that affect certain organ systems. So for instance, if you're looking at like the nervous system, you might want to do Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. If you're looking at circulatory system, you might look at like heart attacks or high cholesterol or stroke. If you're looking at respiratory system, you might want to do asthma or cystic fibrosis or even like COVID-19, which is a disease that affects our respiratory system. So once you have that done, that's sort of the 3 parts of the assignment. The last little bit of the lesson this week is on medical imaging technology and how that can help us with figuring out what's wrong with our bodies when things do go wrong. So I go through a variety of medical imaging technologies. My slide deck's there as well as some videos. Then some quick practice on Quizlet and a little quiz at the end. If you wouldn't mind just clicking through the quiz to show me that you've read through all the material, it'd be greatly appreciated. I hope everybody has a great week. Please contact me if you have any questions.